Jack Peterson had always loved making people laugh. At least, that's what he told himself. He had spent the last 2 years traveling to different places, pulling pranks, and uploading videos on his social media accounts. He had thousands of followers who cheered him on, encouraging his wild and reckless ideas. But deep down, Jack knew that his success depended on one thing: going viral. And to go viral, he needed something big, something shocking, something no one else had done before. So when he landed in London for the first time, he wasn't just there to see the famous sights. He was looking for an opportunity, something daring that would set the internet on fire. And then he had the perfect idea. The Royal Guards. The men who stood in their red coats and tall black hats, never moving, never reacting, no matter what happened around them. People tried all sorts of things to make them laugh or break their focus, but the guards always remained serious. It was like a challenge. Jack's eyes lit up as he walked past Buckingham Palace. Tourists were taking pictures, standing beside the guards, trying to get a reaction. Some made funny faces, some danced, and some even said jokes. But the guards didn't move an inch. That was when Jack made up his mind. He would do something no one else had done before. He would make one of them react, and he would catch it all on camera. He went to a nearby food stall and bought a snack. The food wasn't important. What mattered was the small bottle of hot sauce that came with it. It was bright red and known for being extremely spicy. A single drop could make someone's eyes water. Jack grinned as he held it in his hand. If anything could break a guard's focus, this was it. With his phone in one hand and the hot sauce in the other, Jack walked confidently toward one of the guards. He turned on his camera, making sure to speak loudly so his followers could hear him. "All right, guys, we're about to test just how strong these guards really are. Let's see if they can handle a little bit of spice." Without thinking twice, he squeezed the bottle, and a splash of hot sauce flew through the air, landing directly on the guard's face. The crowd gasped. Some people stepped back in shock. Jack's heart pounded as he waited for something to happen. Surely, the guard would react now. Maybe he'd shout. Maybe he'd wipe his face. Maybe he'd even chase after Jack. That would make for an incredible video. But to Jack's surprise, the guard didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't say a single word. The red liquid dripped down his cheek, but he remained as still as a statue. For the first time, Jack felt uneasy. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. The people around him weren't laughing. Some were whispering, shaking their heads. Others pulled out their phones, not to cheer him on, but to record what he had just done. Jack suddenly realized that this prank might not have been as funny as he thought. But by the time he understood his mistake, it was already too late. Jack stood there, frozen, gripping his phone tightly. His heart pounded in his chest. He had expected laughter, excitement, maybe even cheers from the crowd. But instead, there was silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. The Royal Guard, the man who had just been hit with a splash of burning hot sauce, didn't move an inch. His expression remained blank, his eyes staring straight ahead. As if nothing had happened. Jack couldn't believe it. The red sauce was dripping down the guard's face, yet he showed no reaction at all. No flinching, no wiping it away, nothing. Jack had seen videos before where tourists tried all sorts of tricks to make these guards react. But this was different. He had expected at least some kind of movement, some kind of break in the guard's focus. But now, looking at him, Jack realized just how serious their training must be. The people around him started whispering. A few were shaking their heads. Some had even pulled out their phones, recording everything. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't going the way he had planned. A woman in the crowd spoke up. "That was too much," she muttered. A man standing nearby frowned. "That's not funny. That's just wrong." Jack swallowed hard. He had been so focused on making a viral video that he hadn't thought about how others might see it. In his mind, it was just a harmless joke, a prank to entertain his followers. But looking at the disappointed and shocked faces around him, he suddenly felt different. His confidence wavered. He turned back to the guard, half expecting him to finally react, to say something, to break his silence. But the man didn't even acknowledge him. The bright red sauce continued to drip, and yet he stood firm, his posture straight, his gaze locked forward. Jack shifted nervously. Should he apologize? Should he just walk away? Maybe he could laugh it off, pretend it wasn't a big deal. But deep inside, he knew that wouldn't work. The weight of his actions pressed down on him. He had always believed that pranks were just for fun, that as long as people watched and shared his videos, nothing else mattered. But standing there in front of a royal guard who refused to break his discipline, Jack felt small. For the first time, he questioned himself. He glanced at his phone, which was still recording. His followers were going to see this, but would they still support him? Or would they turn on him, just like the crowd around him? Before he could decide what to do next, he heard the sound of heavy boots approaching. A group of security officers was heading his way, their eyes locked onto him. Jack's stomach dropped. He had made a mistake, a big one. And now he was about to face the consequences. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he saw the security officers moving toward him. Their faces were serious, their steps firm. The realization hit him like a wave. This wasn't just a harmless prank anymore. This was real, and he was in trouble. His hands felt clammy as he quickly turned off his phone's recording. Maybe if he acted innocent, if he pretended like it was all a misunderstanding, they would let him go. But as he glanced around, he saw too many people watching. Some had already started talking among themselves, shaking their heads in disapproval. Others were still recording. His so-called prank had turned into a public spectacle, and there was no escaping it now. One of the officers, a tall man with sharp eyes, stopped right in front of Jack. "Sir, we need to speak with you," he said firmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Jack forced a nervous smile. "Oh, hey, guys. What? Is there a problem?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying his attempt to stay calm. The officer didn't smile back. "You need to come with us." Jack's stomach twisted. "Come with you? Wait, hold on. It was just a joke. I didn't mean any harm. I swear." He took a step back, his mind racing. Maybe if he explained, they'd understand. Maybe if he apologized, they'd let him off with just a warning. The crowd around them grew bigger. More tourists were stopping to see what was happening. The murmurs grew louder. Jack felt like he was being surrounded, not just by security, but by judgment. His confident, playful attitude from earlier had completely disappeared. The officer didn't argue. He simply reached for Jack's wrist. "Sir, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Panic flared inside Jack. He tried to pull his arm away, but the grip was firm. His heart pounded. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He was supposed to make people laugh, not get arrested in front of an entire crowd. "Wait, I can explain." Jack tried again, but another officer stepped forward, blocking his way. "You assaulted a royal guard," the second officer said. "That's not a joke." Jack's stomach dropped. The word assault sent a shiver down his spine. Assault. No, that made it sound serious. That made it sound like he had done something terrible. He wanted to argue, to tell them that he hadn't meant it that way. But as he looked around at the disapproving faces, the phones pointed at him, and the unshaken guard still standing tall despite what had happened, Jack knew there was no talking his way out of this. The officer guided him away from the scene, the crowd parting as he walked. He could hear whispers. Some people were muttering things he didn't want to hear. Others were already posting online, their fingers moving fast on their screens. Jack swallowed hard. This wasn't just a bad prank anymore. This was a disaster. And it was only the beginning. As Jack was escorted away from the palace gates, he felt a growing sense of dread. His mind raced as the officers led him toward a nearby security van. The cold metal cuffs on his wrists served as a constant reminder that things had gone terribly wrong. Just moments ago, he had been joking around, thinking he was about to pull off the greatest prank of his life. Now, he was facing consequences he had never imagined. He thought about his phone, which was still in his pocket. His followers were watching this unfold in real time. The video of the prank had already started to spread across social media, and he could hear his phone buzzing with notifications. His followers were likely commenting, sharing, and reacting to what was happening. But what were they saying? Were they laughing with him, or had they turned against him? As the security van doors slammed shut behind him, Jack sat in silence, staring out the small window. The world outside seemed far away, and for the first time, he felt small. He had been chasing fame, always looking for the next viral moment. But now, all he had was a broken reputation and the weight of his own actions. Inside the van, the officers didn't say much. They focused on their work, exchanging glances but not engaging in conversation with Jack. It was as if they had seen this kind of thing before. He wanted to say something to break the tension, to explain himself, but the words didn't come. When they arrived at the station, Jack was led through a series of hallways and into a small interrogation room. His mind was spinning, but he still couldn't quite grasp the reality of what had happened. How did it all go so wrong? He had just wanted to make people laugh. Was that so bad? Sure, the hot sauce had been a bit extreme, but he had never thought it would lead to this. As he sat in the cold, sterile room, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't just his followers who were commenting. The video had gone viral, really viral. News outlets had picked up the story, and his name was everywhere. Headlines screamed, "Tourist pranks Royal Guard with hot sauce, faces arrest." Jack's stomach churned. He opened his phone, scrolling through the endless stream of comments and posts. His followers had flooded his social media, but not with support. They were criticizing him, calling him disrespectful and immature. His friends, those who had once cheered him on, were silent. They had unfollowed him, blocked him, or worse, publicly called him out. "Why would you do something so stupid?" one comment read. "Hope it was worth it, loser," another one said. "You really messed up this time." Jack felt his throat tighten. This wasn't the response he had been expecting. He had always thought that as long as his videos were getting views, he was winning. But now, as he scrolled through the comments, he realized how much he had lost. His popularity, his so-called success, had turned into a public failure. His phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't a comment. It was a notification from one of his sponsors. They had dropped him. Everything was unraveling. What was supposed to be a funny moment had turned his life upside down, and he had no idea how to fix it. As Jack sat in the interrogation room, his mind raced with fear and disbelief. He had never imagined things could go this far. A prank. That's all it was supposed to be. A harmless joke to make his followers laugh, and maybe even get some attention from sponsors. But now, as he sat there, he realized just how wrong he had been. When the door finally opened, a detective entered. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. He didn't look at Jack with anger, but there was no sympathy in his gaze either. Jack felt like a child caught doing something wrong. "Mr. Peterson, you're being charged with assault," the detective said, his voice steady. "You threw hot sauce on a royal guard. You will be required to pay a fine, and depending on how things go, there may be additional consequences." Jack's mind went blank for a moment. Assault. He had never intended for it to go that far. It had just been a silly prank. The guard hadn't even reacted. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry and the words wouldn't come. "Look, I didn't mean any harm," Jack finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "It was just a joke. I didn't think it would." The detective raised a hand, cutting him off. "I understand, but the law doesn't care about your intentions. You chose to disrespect someone who serves this country, someone who represents tradition. This isn't something that can be taken lightly. Jack swallowed hard. His stomach twisted as the weight of his situation began to settle in. He had no idea how serious things were until now. This wasn't just about losing followers or making a fool of himself online. This was about facing actual legal consequences. The detective continued to explain the legal process, but Jack could hardly focus on his words. All he could think about was how quickly his world had turned upside down. Just a few hours ago, he had been on top of the world, posting videos, getting likes, and planning his next big stunt. Now, he was facing the possibility of jail time, fines, and deportation. But that wasn't all. His phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't just a social media notification. It was an email from one of his biggest sponsors. The message was short and to the point. "We regret to inform you that we are terminating our partnership effective immediately." Jack felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. He had worked so hard to build his brand, to get sponsors, to grow his audience. And now, just like that, it was all slipping away. He stared at his phone in disbelief, reading the email over and over, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But it wasn't. They were done with him. The very thing that had once been his ticket to success had now become the reason for his downfall. The detective finished his explanation and left the room, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. As the door clicked shut, Jack felt a strange mix of anger, regret, and embarrassment. He had let his desire for attention and fame cloud his judgment. And now, there was no easy way out. His phone buzzed again, but this time, Jack didn't even bother to look. He knew it would only be more bad news. He was starting to realize that his actions had consequences, and they were far worse than he had ever imagined. Jack was finally allowed to leave the interrogation room, but his mind felt like it was trapped in a fog. He wasn't sure if it was the overwhelming guilt or the mounting fear of what lay ahead, but everything around him felt distant. The officers had taken his details, explaining that he would have to return for a court appearance. The legal process was about to begin, and the weight of it all was sinking in. As Jack walked out of the station, he realized just how much his life had changed in the span of a few hours. He had once prided himself on his online following. The likes, the comments, the shares. He thought he was on top of the world. But now, all of it seemed like a distant memory. His phone had stopped buzzing with excited notifications. Instead, it was filled with messages of disappointment and anger. He unlocked his phone and opened his social media, hoping for some kind of apology or understanding from his followers. But the comments were harsh. "What were you thinking?" One read. "Unfollowed. You've really messed up." The sting of each comment was like a slap in the face. These were the people who had cheered him on, who had supported him through all his pranks and challenges. But now, they were turning their backs on him. He scrolled through his feed, but the more he read, the worse he felt. There were memes making fun of him, headlines mocking his mistake, and friends who had once celebrated his stunts now calling him out for being disrespectful. His head buzzed with 1,000 thoughts. Was this the end of his online career? Was this the moment everything crumbled? He had spent years building a brand, cultivating an image of the guy who could make anyone laugh with just a simple prank. But now, that image was shattered, replaced by something he never intended. Someone who had crossed the line. As Jack walked through the busy streets of London, he couldn't escape the feeling of being judged. Everywhere he went, it seemed like people were looking at him differently. The tourists who had once laughed at his jokes now looked at him with disapproval. Even the people who had filmed the prank earlier didn't seem to be laughing anymore. They were probably sharing the footage, but not in the way Jack had imagined. Back at his hotel, Jack sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. He felt empty. The fame he had once craved now felt like a heavy burden. He knew that things weren't going to go back to the way they were. His sponsors had already dropped him, and his reputation was in ruins. But what hurt the most was the feeling that he had let down everyone who had supported him, especially his family. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his mom. She had always been supportive of his dreams, but even she seemed upset. "Jack, I don't know what happened, but I hope you understand the seriousness of this. You've made a big mistake, and you need to make things right." Her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He had always thought his mom was proud of him, but now she was just disappointed. And that hurt more than anything else. Jack stared at the message for a long time, realizing that the journey he had been on wasn't just about gaining followers or making money. It was about respect, for himself and for others. And now he had to find a way to rebuild the respect he had lost. For the next few days, Jack stayed holed up in his hotel room, trying to figure out how to undo the damage he had caused. Every time he checked his phone, the flood of negative comments hit him like a wave. His phone was constantly buzzing with new notifications, but instead of the usual excitement of gaining likes and shares, these notifications felt like reminders of his failure. News outlets continued to cover the story, and he was now being labeled as the tourist who disrespected a royal guard. He had gone from being a viral sensation to the subject of ridicule. Jack thought back to when he first started making videos. At the time, it had been about the thrill, the excitement of getting a reaction from people, the rush of creating something that made others laugh. But now, as he scrolled through his social media, he realized that he hadn't been thinking about the impact of his actions. In his pursuit of attention, he had forgotten something crucial: respect. He had crossed a line, and now it felt like he was paying the price. His family's disappointment weighed heavily on his mind, especially his mom's message. He had always looked up to her, and hearing her say that she was ashamed of him made him question everything. He didn't want to disappoint her, or anyone else for that matter. In an effort to make things right, Jack decided to take action. He needed to own up to what he had done. He needed to show people that he understood the gravity of his mistake and that he was genuinely sorry. But how? He thought about reaching out to the royal guard, the person who had been the target of his prank. Maybe if he could apologize directly to him, it would show that he was truly remorseful. Jack wasn't sure if the guard would even want to hear from him, but it felt like the right thing to do. He also knew he needed to issue an apology to his followers, the people who had supported him all along. It wasn't enough to just say sorry in a social media post. Jack needed to show them that he understood why his actions were wrong and that he had learned from his mistake. But as he sat there, contemplating his next move, Jack realized that apologizing wasn't going to be easy. The damage had already been done, and no amount of words could instantly fix everything. His sponsors had already dropped him, and it was unclear if he could ever regain their trust. The people who had once laughed at his pranks were now angry at him. His reputation, built over years of carefully crafted content, was now in tatters. Still, Jack knew he had to try. He couldn't just let this moment define him. He had to show that he was more than just the guy who pulled pranks for attention. He had to prove that he could be someone who learned from his mistakes and took responsibility for them. With a deep breath, Jack decided to start by making a public apology. He knew it would be difficult, but it was the first step toward redemption. The next few weeks would be crucial. Would his fans forgive him? Would he ever be able to rebuild his career? The uncertainty was terrifying. But Jack knew one thing for sure. He had to try. The future of his career and his integrity depended on it. Jack spent the next few days crafting his apology. It wasn't easy. He had always been good at creating content that entertained. But this was different. This wasn't about making people laugh or impressing them with stunts. This was about showing genuine remorse for a mistake that had hurt others, and that was much harder to do. He sat in front of his camera, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to find the right words. He knew he couldn't just brush it off or make excuses. This wasn't the time for jokes or trying to shift the blame. He had to own up to his actions. "Hey everyone," Jack started, his voice a little nervous. "I've been reading all your comments, and I can't begin to explain how sorry I am for what I did. I made a huge mistake. What I did to the royal guard wasn't funny, and I know it was disrespectful. I crossed a line, and I want to take full responsibility for that." He paused, taking a deep breath. The weight of his mistake felt even heavier as he spoke. He could already imagine the people watching, waiting for his apology. But he wasn't apologizing just to please his followers. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. "I didn't think about the consequences of my actions," he continued. "I got so caught up in trying to make a viral video, to get people to laugh, that I didn't stop to think about how it would affect someone else. And for that, I'm truly sorry. I respect the Royal Guard, and I respect all of you who've supported me. And I promise, I've learned from this." Jack could feel the nerves start to fade as he spoke more clearly. The words were coming from the heart now, and he could feel a shift within himself. This wasn't just about rebuilding his image. It was about becoming a better person. He knew this apology wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start. "I've reached out to the Royal Guard to personally apologize, and I hope he'll accept my apology. I'm also going to take a break from posting content for a while to reflect on my actions and figure out how I can be more thoughtful moving forward." He finished the video with a sincere expression, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't a quick fix, but he had done what he could. As soon as he hit post, Jack felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He knew the journey to rebuild his reputation would take time, but this was the first step. After posting the video, Jack took a step back. He didn't check his phone immediately. He needed to give people time to process. For the first time in days, he decided to step away from the internet. He walked around the city, away from the noise of notifications and comments, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. When Jack finally checked his phone again a few hours later, the responses started coming in. Many of his followers appreciated the apology, some of them saying they respected his honesty. A few, however, remained angry, and Jack understood that. He had lost their trust, and trust was something that couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But then, there was a message that made him pause. It was from the Royal Guard. "Apology accepted," the message read. "Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." That message meant more to Jack than any like, share, or comment ever could. It wasn't just an apology that he had sought. It was understanding. The Guard had chosen to be the bigger person, and in a way, it gave Jack hope. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would be days when Jack would wonder if he could ever truly regain what he had lost. But for now, he knew one thing. He had taken responsibility. And in that moment, he had regained a part of himself that he feared he had lost forever.